The moment Teresa Lawson saw the chains, she knew her uncle had finally made good on his threat to be rid of her. She stood in the dusty backroom of the saloon in Wheatland, Wyoming Territory, her hands trembling as the iron cuffs bit into her wrists. The year was 1876, and the spring air carried the scent of melting snow and manure from the stockyards. Her Uncle Raymond stood by the door, his weathered face showing no remorse as he counted the bills the slave trader had given him. 23 years old, and Teresa had never imagined she would be sold like livestock. But here she was, watching the only family she had left exchange her freedom for $300. "You always were more trouble than you were worth," Raymond muttered, not even looking at her as he stuffed the money into his coat pocket. "Your ma should have drowned you when you were born. At least this way you will serve some purpose." Teresa wanted to scream at him, to tell him that she had worked his ranch for 5 years without a single day of rest, that she had nursed him through pneumonia the previous winter when no one else would come near him. But the words died in her throat as the trader, a greasy man named Silas, yanked her chain and pulled her toward the back door. "Where are you taking me?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "You will find out soon enough," Silas said, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "Got a buyer lined up already. He is waiting at the stock pens." They emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight, and Teresa squinted against the glare. Wheatland was bustling with activity as it always was on market days. Ranchers and cowboys filled the streets, conducting business and visiting the various establishments. No one paid them any mind as Silas led her down the alley toward the livestock area. She supposed the sight of a woman in chains was not unusual enough to warrant attention in a rough town like this. The stock pens smelled of cattle and horses, and the sounds of lowing animals filled the air. Silas pulled her to a stop near a fence where several men were examining horses. Her heart pounded as she realized she was about to be inspected the same way, reduced to nothing more than property to be bought and sold. "Now you stand here and keep your mouth shut," Silas ordered. "Man coming to look at you has money, and I do not need you scaring him off with your tongue." Teresa stood there, humiliation burning through her veins. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5 feet and 8 inches, with dark auburn hair that hung in a thick braid down her back. Her mother had been beautiful once, or so she had been told, and Teresa had inherited her fine features and green eyes. But right now, covered in dust from the road and wearing a plain cotton dress that had seen better days, she felt like nothing at all. She heard boots approaching and forced herself to lift her chin. If she was going to be sold, she would at least maintain her dignity. The man who walked up was not what she expected. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps around 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and dark brown hair that touched his collar. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, not a wealthy rancher, his denim trousers dusty and his shirt showing signs of hard use. But his boots were good quality, and the gun belt around his waist was well maintained. "This is the woman I told you about," Silas said, his voice taking on an oily quality. "Strong, healthy, can work hard. Papers say she has been running a ranch for the past 5 years. The cowboy's gray eyes met Teresa's, and she saw something in them that surprised her. It was not lust or cruelty, but rather a deep sadness that seemed to mirror her own. He looked at the chains on her wrists, and his jaw tightened. "Take those off," he said quietly. "Now hold on," Silas protested. "Transaction is not complete yet. Need to see your money first." The cowboy reached into his pocket and pulled out a roll of bills. Teresa's eyes widened as he counted out $500, far more than her uncle had received. Silas's eyes gleamed with greed as he snatched up the money. That is more than generous, mister. She is all yours. Silas fumbled with his keys and removed the chains from Teresa's wrists. The moment she was free, he scurried away, clearly afraid the cowboy might change his mind. Teresa stood there, rubbing her chafed wrists, unsure what to do. The cowboy had paid for her, which meant she belonged to him now. The thought made her stomach turn. He studied her for a long moment, then removed his hat and held it in his hands. "My name is Ethan Novak," he said. His voice was low and rough, the voice of a man who spent more time with horses than people. "I am a rancher about 10 miles outside of town. I have a small spread, nothing fancy, but it is mine." Teresa waited for him to continue, her body tense. "I am not going to hurt you," Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. "And I am not keeping you as property. I bought you because I could not stand by and watch that man sell you to someone who would abuse you." She stared at him, not sure if she believed what she was hearing. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "I lost my own sister 3 years ago. She was in a situation similar to yours and no one helped her. She died because of it. I swore I would never stand by and let something like that happen again if I could prevent it." Teresa felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. She had cried enough over the past few days. "So what happens now? What do you want from me?" Ethan put his hat back on and looked toward the mountains in the distance. "I want to offer you a choice. You can come work at my ranch as a hired hand. I will pay you fair wages, and you will be free to leave whenever you want. Or if you prefer, I can give you enough money to get on the next stage and go wherever you want. Either way, you are free." "I do not understand," Teresa said, her mind reeling. "You just paid $500 for me. Why would you let me go?" "Because no person should be owned by another," Ethan said, his voice firm. "What was done to you was wrong. I may not be able to change the whole world, but I can change your situation." Teresa looked down at her hands, at the red marks where the chains had been. She thought about her options. She had no money, no family who cared about her, and no prospects. If she took the stage to another town, she would be in the same situation within a week, desperate and vulnerable. But if she went with this cowboy, she would at least have work and a roof over her head. And something in his eyes told her he was telling the truth about not hurting her. "I will come work for you," she said finally. "But I want it understood that I am working to pay off what you spent on me. I do not want charity." Ethan nodded. "That is fair. Though I will tell you right now, at standard wages it will take you about 2 years to pay off $500. "Then I will work for 2 years," Teresa said. "I am good with horses and cattle. I can cook and mend fences. I am not afraid of hard work." "I can see that," Ethan said. "Come on then. Let us get some supplies and head out to the ranch. It is getting late and I want to be home before dark." They walked through Wheatland together, and Teresa felt the eyes of the townspeople on them. She kept her head high, refusing to show any shame. She had done nothing wrong. It was her uncle who should be ashamed, selling his own blood for drinking money. Ethan seemed oblivious to the stairs, or perhaps he was just used to them. He led her to the general store and bought several sacks of flour, sugar, coffee, and other supplies. Then he took her to the dress shop. "Pick out 2 work dresses and whatever else you need," he said, handing her some bills. Teresa hesitated. "I cannot accept this. It is too much." "Consider it part of your wages," Ethan said. "I need you to have proper clothes for working on the ranch. Those are my requirements as your employer." Put that way, Teresa could not argue. She went into the shop and quickly selected 2 sturdy cotton dresses in practical colors, along with some undergarments and a pair of work boots. The shopkeeper, a thin woman with sharp eyes, looked at her with barely concealed curiosity but kept her questions to herself. When they left the store, Ethan led her to where his wagon was hitched. It was a sturdy vehicle, well-maintained but showing its age. Two strong horses were in the traces, both looking well-fed and healthy. Teresa climbed up onto the bench seat beside Ethan, very aware of how close they were sitting. She tried to keep some distance between them, but the bench was narrow and their shoulders kept brushing. As they rode out of Wheatland, Teresa watched the town disappear behind them. She wondered if she would ever see it again, and realized she did not care if she did. The place held nothing but bad memories now. Ethan drove in silence for a while, letting the horses set their own pace. The landscape around them was beautiful in its starkness, rolling hills covered in prairie grass just beginning to turn green with spring growth. "Tell me about your ranch," Teresa said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "It is called the Rocking Inn," Ethan said. "I have about 500 acres and 100 head of cattle. I also breed horses, which is really my passion. I have a small house, a barn, and some outbuildings. There is a bunkhouse where my hired hand stays, but he left 2 weeks ago to go back east to see his family. So right now it is just me running the place." "That must be difficult," Teresa said. 500 acres is a lot for one person." "It is," Ethan admitted. "I have been working from sunup to sundown trying to keep up. That is actually why I was in town today. I was going to see about hiring someone to help with the spring branding. Then I saw that trader leading you down the alley, and I just could not walk away." Teresa looked at his profile, noticing the strong line of his jaw and the tired lines around his eyes. He looked like a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Your sister," she said softly. "What happened to her?" Ethan was quiet for so long that Teresa thought he was not going to answer. Finally, he said, "Her name was Emma. She was 2 years younger than me. After our parents died, we tried to keep the family farm going back in Missouri, but we got hit with a bad drought. We lost everything. Emma got desperate and took a job as a domestic servant for a wealthy family. The man of the house was cruel to her. He beat her, and worse. When she finally tried to leave, he locked her in the cellar. She died there, alone and scared." "I am so sorry," Teresa whispered, her heart aching for the pain in his voice. "By the time I found out what happened, it was too late," Ethan continued. "I had gone to California to find work in the mines. When I came back with money to help her, she was already gone. The man who killed her never faced justice. His family had too much power. So I took what money I had and came out here, as far away from that place as I could get. I bought this land and started over, but I swore I would never let another person suffer if I had the power to stop it." They rode in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence now. Teresa felt a connection forming between them, a shared understanding of loss and injustice. The sun was getting low on the horizon when they finally turned off the main road onto a smaller track. About 20 minutes later, the ranch came into view. The Rocking Inn was modest, but well kept. The house was a single-story building made of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. The barn was larger, painted red with white trim, and looked sturdy. There were several corrals and pens, all with good fencing. In the distance, Teresa could see cattle grazing on the hillside. It was not a grand estate, but it was honest and real, and Teresa felt something ease in her chest at the sight of it. Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle on her waist. "I will show you where you can stay. The bunkhouse has 2 rooms. You can take the one on the left. It has a bed and a stove, and it is private. There is a pump outside for water, and the privy is behind the barn." Teresa followed him to the bunkhouse, which was a small structure about 50 feet from the main house. The room he showed her was Spartan but clean. There was a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a small table, a chair, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. A single window looked out toward the mountains. "It is not much," Ethan said, looking almost apologetic. "It is more than I had this morning," Teresa said honestly. "Thank you." Ethan nodded and backed toward the door. "Get yourself settled. I will take care of the horses and then fix us some supper. Come up to the main house when you are ready." After he left, Teresa sat down on the bed and let herself feel everything she had been holding back all day. The fear, the humiliation, the anger at her uncle, and now this strange, cautious hope that maybe her life was not over after all. She allowed herself to cry for a few minutes, then washed her face with water from the pitcher on the table and changed into one of her new dresses. When she walked up to the main house, she found Ethan in the kitchen, cooking bacon and beans on the stove. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a fireplace taking up most of one wall. There were 2 doors leading off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. Everything was neat and orderly, the mark of a man who lived alone and took care of his possessions. "Sit down," Ethan said, gesturing to the table. "Food will be ready in a minute." Teresa sat and watched him work. He moved efficiently around the kitchen, clearly comfortable with the domestic tasks. When he served the food, it was plain but good. They ate in silence for a while, both too hungry and tired for conversation. "We start work at sunrise," Ethan said finally. "I will show you around the ranch tomorrow and we can figure out what tasks suit you best. If you have any problems or concerns, you tell me right away." "Understood, understood," Teresa said. "And one more thing," Ethan said, his gray eyes meeting hers. "I meant what I said about you being free to leave. If you ever feel uncomfortable or want to go, you just say the word. You are not a prisoner here." Teresa nodded, though she had no intention of leaving. For the first time in years, she felt safe. After supper, she helped Ethan wash the dishes, then returned to the bunkhouse. She lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, and eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Teresa woke before dawn to the sound of a rooster crowing. She dressed quickly in her work clothes and pulled her hair back into a practical braid. When she stepped outside, the air was crisp and cold, her breath forming clouds in the early morning light. Ethan was already in the barn, feeding the horses. "Good morning," he said when he saw her. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," Teresa said. "What do you need me to do?" Ethan showed her around the ranch, explaining his system for feeding the animals, checking the fences, and managing the herd. Teresa listened carefully, asking questions when she did not understand something. She had worked on her uncle's ranch, but every operation was different and she wanted to learn Ethan's ways. They spent the morning riding the fence line, checking for breaks or weak spots. Ethan rode a big bay gelding, and he had saddled a gentle mare for Teresa. As they rode, Ethan told her about his plans for the ranch, how he wanted to expand the horse breeding operation and maybe add more cattle if he could afford it. Teresa found herself enjoying his company. He was easy to talk to, and he treated her like an equal, asking her opinion on things and listening when she spoke. Around midday, they stopped by a stream to let the horses drink and to eat the lunch Ethan had packed. They sat on the bank, eating biscuits and cold bacon, watching the water flow over the rocks. "Can I ask you something?" Teresa said. "Sure," Ethan replied. "Why did you pay so much for me? Sila's would have taken less." "I heard him tell my uncle that he expected to get maybe 300, 350 at most." Ethan was quiet for a moment, chewing his food thoughtfully. "I wanted to make sure he would not come looking for you again. If I paid him enough, he would not have any reason to try to get you back. And I wanted to send a message that you were under my protection now." "Under your protection," Teresa repeated. "What does that mean exactly?" It means if anyone tries to hurt you or bother you, they will have to go through me first, Ethan said simply. I know people in town might talk. They might say things about you living out here with me. If anyone gives you trouble, you let me know. Teresa felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had spent so long feeling alone and vulnerable. Having someone willing to stand up for her was a foreign concept. You are a good man, Ethan Novak. He looked uncomfortable with the praise. I just try to do what is right. They finished their lunch and continued working. By the time they returned to the ranch that evening, Teresa was exhausted but satisfied. It felt good to work hard at something meaningful. Ethan made supper again, insisting that she rest since it was her first day. But Teresa joined him in the kitchen anyway, helping where she could. Over the next few weeks. They fell into a routine. They woke early and worked hard all day, managing the ranch together. Teresa proved to be as capable as she had claimed. She could rope and ride as well as any man, and she had a gentle hand with the horses. Ethan found himself relying on her more and more, and he was grateful for her presence. But something else was happening too, something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Teresa found herself looking forward to their meals together, to the conversations they had while working. Ethan had a quiet sense of humor that would catch her off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. And Ethan found himself noticing things about Teresa that had nothing to do with her work ethic. The way the sunlight caught in her auburn hair, the musical sound of her laugh, the determined set of her jaw when she was concentrating on a difficult task. One evening in early June, about 2 months after Teresa had arrived at the ranch, a storm rolled in from the mountains. The wind picked up suddenly, and rain began to pour down in sheets. Ethan and Teresa were in the barn, having just finished the evening feeding. The horses were restless, sensing the storm's energy. We should head to the house, Ethan said, raising his voice over the sound of the rain on the roof. This looks like it is going to be a bad one. They ran from the barn, but the distance to the main house was much shorter than to the bunkhouse. By the time they reached Ethan's door, they were both soaked through. Ethan built up the fire while Teresa stood dripping on the floor, her arms wrapped around herself. You should get out of those wet clothes, Ethan said. I will find you something dry to wear. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers. These will be too big, but they are dry. You can change in the bedroom. Teresa took the clothes and went into Ethan's room, closing the door behind her. She peeled off her wet dress and undergarments, then put on his clothes. The shirt hung to her knees and the trousers were comically large, but they were warm and smelled like him, like leather and pine and something uniquely Ethan. When she emerged, Ethan had changed into dry clothes as well and was making coffee. Storm sounds like it is getting worse, he said, handing her a cup. You should probably stay here tonight. I do not want you trying to get to the bunkhouse in this weather. Teresa nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Outside, the wind howled and the rain continued to pound against the windows. Lightning flashed, followed by deep rumbles of thunder. They sat by the fire, drinking their coffee, and Ethan told her stories about his childhood in Missouri, about his parents and his sister Emma. Teresa found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, about her mother who had died when Teresa was 15, about how her uncle had changed after his wife left him, becoming bitter and cruel. He was not always like that, Teresa said quietly. When I was little, he used to bring me peppermint sticks when he came to visit. But after Aunt Margaret left him, he started drinking. He blamed me somehow, said that I was a burden that drove away his wife. It was not true. She left because he was cruel to her too. People look for someone to blame when they are hurting, Ethan said. It does not make it right, but it happens. What he did to you was unforgivable. I used to dream about leaving, Teresa admitted, but I had no money and nowhere to go. And part of me kept thinking he might change back into the uncle I remembered from childhood, but he only got worse. You do not have to worry about him anymore, Ethan said. You are safe here. Their eyes met across the firelight, and Teresa felt something shift between them. The air seemed charged with more than just the electricity of the storm. Ethan stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-lashed darkness. "Teresa," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" she asked, setting down her coffee cup. "These past 2 months, having you here, working with you, talking with you, it has been the best time I have had since I came to Wyoming. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be a better man. And I know it is probably too soon, and you probably do not feel the same way, but I had to tell you. I am falling in love with you." Teresa's heart hammered in her chest. She stood and walked over to where Ethan stood by the window. "Look at me," she said softly. He turned, and she saw vulnerability in his gray eyes, a fear of rejection that touched her deeply. "I feel the same way," she said. "I have been trying not to. I told myself it was gratitude or just being relieved to be safe, but it is more than that. When I am with you, I feel like I have finally found home." Ethan reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel obligated because of what I did." "I am sure," Teresa said. "What you did was save my life, yes. But who you are as a person is what made me fall in love with you. Your kindness, your integrity, your strength. I love you, Ethan." He leaned down and kissed her then, soft and sweet, as if she were something precious that might break. Teresa wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her feelings into it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I want to do this right," Ethan said. "I want to court you properly. And when enough time has passed that you are certain of your feelings, I want to marry you. I want you to take my name and be my wife, not my employee." "How much time?" Teresa asked, smiling. "As much as you need," Ethan said. "A month, a year, 10 years. I will wait as long as it takes." "I do not need more time," Teresa said. "I know what I want, but I understand if you want to wait to make sure I am not confusing gratitude with love." Ethan kissed her again, deeper this time. "I know you are not confused. You are the most clear-headed person I have ever met. But I want the people in town to see that we did this right, that I courted you and married you proper. I do not want anyone to have reason to gossip about you or think poorly of you." "I do not care what people think," Teresa said. "But I do," Ethan said firmly. "You deserve respect. So we will do this right. I will court you for a proper amount of time, at least 3 months. And then if you still want to marry me, we will have a real wedding with witnesses and everything legal." Teresa laughed, her heart full of joy. "All right, Cowboy, you can court me. But I already know what my answer will be." They spent the rest of the evening talking and stealing kisses by the firelight. When the storm finally passed and Teresa returned to the bunkhouse, she felt like she was walking on air. The next morning, their relationship had a new dimension. They still worked side by side, but now there were touches that lingered a moment longer, smiles that held secret meaning, and a sense of anticipation that colored everything. Ethan was true to his word about courting her properly. Every Sunday, he would drive them into Wheatland for church, and afterward they would walk through town together, stopping at the cafe for lunch or visiting the general store. He introduced her to his friends and neighbors as his intended, and if anyone remembered that she was the woman who had been sold by her uncle, they were polite enough not to mention it. Teresa also noticed that Ethan always made sure to find small ways to show his affection. He would pick wildflowers and leave them on her table. He taught her to play chess in the evenings, and they would sit by the fire with the board between them, talking and laughing. He carved her a beautiful wooden box for her personal items, with a pattern of roses on the lid. In August, 3 months after that stormy night when they had confessed their feelings, Ethan took Teresa on a picnic to a beautiful spot on the ranch where a natural spring created a small pond. The cottonwood trees provided shade, and the grass was thick and soft. They ate the lunch Teresa had prepared and talked about their plans for the ranch. "I want to expand the horse operation," Ethan said. "I have been saving money, and I think I can afford to buy some breeding stock from that rancher up in Montana. Good horses with strong bloodlines." "That sounds wonderful," Teresa said. "I can help train them. I have always loved working with horses." Ethan took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Teresa, I want to ask you something. It has been 3 months, like I said I would wait, and I do not want to wait any more. Will you marry me? Will you take my name and be my wife and my partner in building this ranch?" Teresa felt tears of happiness well up in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Novak." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small ruby. "This was my mother's ring," he said. "It is the only thing I have left of her. I would be honored if you would wear it." Teresa held out her hand, and Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, and he held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I love you," he murmured. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," Teresa said. "You gave me back my life. You gave me hope and love and a future. I will love you until the day I die." They decided to get married in September, after the fall roundup was complete. Teresa wrote a letter to an old friend from her childhood, asking her to attend the wedding. She did not invite her uncle, though she heard through town gossip that he had drunk away all the money from selling her and was now destitute. Teresa found she could not summon any sympathy for him. The wedding was held in the small church in Wheatland on a beautiful September morning. The leaves were just beginning to turn gold on the cottonwoods, and the air had that crisp quality that came with autumn. Teresa wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she and Ethan had ordered from a catalog. It was simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan wore a new suit, and Teresa thought he looked impossibly handsome. The church was filled with their friends and neighbors, people who had come to know and respect them over the past months. The minister conducted a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When he pronounced them husband and wife and Ethan kissed her, there was applause and cheering. Afterward, there was a celebration at the town hall with food and dancing. Teresa had never been so happy in her entire life. That night, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife. Ethan carried Teresa over the threshold of the main house, and she laughed with delight. He set her down gently in the main room, which looked different now. While they had been in town, some of Ethan's friends had come and moved all of Teresa's belongings from the bunkhouse into the main house. Her clothes were hanging in the wardrobe in what was now their bedroom, and her personal items were arranged on the dresser. "Welcome home, Mrs. Novak," Ethan said, his voice full of emotion. "Mrs. Novak," Teresa repeated, savoring the sound of it. "I never thought I would have a name I could be proud of." Ethan took her in his arms and kissed her deeply. "You deserve every good thing in this world, and I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." They made love that night for the first time, and it was tender and passionate, and everything Teresa had dreamed it could be. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, talking softly in the darkness. Ethan told her about his dreams for the future, about building the ranch into something prosperous that they could pass on to their children one day. Teresa shared her own dreams about creating a real home filled with love and laughter, so different from the cold, bitter household she had grown up in. The following months were some of the happiest of Teresa's life. She and Ethan worked side by side every day, building their ranch and their life together. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk, or Ethan would play the harmonica he had inherited from his father while Teresa mended clothes or worked on a quilt. They attended church on Sundays and gradually became pillars of the community in Wheatland. In the spring of 1877, Teresa discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. His eyes lit up with joy, and he jumped up from the table and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "Are you certain?" he asked, setting her down gently as if she were made of glass. "I am certain," Teresa said. "The baby should arrive in late autumn." Ethan kissed her tenderly. "This is the best news I have ever received. We are going to be a family." "We are already a family," Teresa said, touching his cheek. "But yes, we are going to expand it." Ethan was incredibly protective during Teresa's pregnancy. He insisted she not do any heavy work, and he hired a young man from town to help with the ranch chores so Teresa could rest more. Teresa chafed at the restrictions at first, used to being active and useful, but she eventually accepted that Ethan's concern came from love. As summer turned to autumn, Teresa's belly grew round and she began to feel the baby move. She would take Ethan's hand and place it on her stomach so he could feel the kicks, and the wonder on his face never failed to move her. They spent the long evenings preparing for the baby's arrival, fixing up the small second bedroom as a nursery and accumulating the necessary supplies. In November, on a cold night with snow falling softly outside, Teresa went into labor. Ethan rode into town through the storm to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, an experienced woman who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Ethan stayed by Teresa's side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement when she thought she could not endure another moment. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry, his little fists waving indignantly. Mrs. Patterson cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Teresa's arms. "You have a strong, healthy boy," the midwife said with a smile. Teresa looked down at her son's tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it almost frightened her. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Teresa, staring at their child with wonder. "He is beautiful," Ethan whispered. "He looks like you." "He has your chin," Teresa said, tracing the baby's features with her finger. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but now that the baby was here, they wanted to be sure they chose the right one. Ethan looked at his son thoughtfully. "What about Samuel?" He suggested. "It was my father's name, Samuel James Novak." "Samuel," Teresa repeated, testing the name. She looked down at the baby, who had stopped crying and was now looking up at her with dark, unfocused eyes. "Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world." The baby made a small sound, and both parents laughed with delight. Over the next few days, as Teresa recovered from the birth, they adjusted to life with a newborn. Samuel was a good baby, not colicky, but he needed to be fed every few hours and his sleep schedule was unpredictable. Ethan did everything he could to help, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried at night, changing his diapers and singing to him in his rough, off-key voice. Teresa watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. He was so gentle with Samuel, so patient and devoted. She had known Ethan was a good man, but seeing him as a father confirmed everything she had believed about his character. As Samuel grew, the ranch prospered. Ethan's investment in the horse breeding operation paid off, and they became known throughout Wyoming territory for producing quality animals. They were able to hire 2 permanent ranch hands, which took some of the burden off Ethan and Teresa. With the extra help, Teresa had more time to spend with Samuel, teaching him to walk and talk, reading to him from the few books they owned. By 1879, Samuel was 2 years old, a lively, curious boy who followed his father around the ranch whenever he could. Teresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1880 they welcomed a daughter into the family. They named her Rose Emily Novak, after Ethan's mother and sister. Rose was different from Samuel. Where he had been robust and boisterous, she was delicate and quiet, with huge gray eyes like her father's and auburn hair like her mother's. Ethan doted on her shamelessly, and Samuel was a proud big brother, always wanting to hold her and show her his toys. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more acreage and increased their cattle herd. Ethan built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. In 1883, their 3rd child was born, another boy they named Thomas William. He was a perfect blend of his siblings, with his father's sturdy build and his mother's green eyes. Teresa sometimes thought about the terrified young woman who had stood in chains in Wheatland 7 years earlier. It seemed like another lifetime, like it had happened to a different person. She was Teresa Novak now, wife and mother, partner in a successful ranch, respected member of the community. But she never forgot where she had come from, and she made sure to help other women who found themselves in desperate situations. When a young widow in town needed work, Teresa hired her to help with the housework and the children. When a woman fleeing an abusive husband showed up at their door in the middle of the night, Teresa took her in and helped her get safely to her family in another state. Ethan supported all of these efforts, proud of his wife's compassionate heart. In the summer of 1885, Teresa was hanging laundry in the yard when she saw a figure approaching on foot down the road. As the person got closer, she realized it was a man, thin and ragged, walking with a pronounced limp. Something about him seemed familiar, and as he got closer, her heart sank as she recognized him. It was her Uncle Raymond. He looked terrible, aged far beyond his years. His clothes were little more than rags, and his face was gaunt and weathered. He stopped at the gate, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch. "Teresa," he said, his voice hoarse, "I need to talk to you." Teresa felt a surge of old anger and pain, but also a surprising amount of pity. This broken man in front of her bore little resemblance to the uncle who had sold her. She walked over to the gate but did not open it. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "I am dying," Raymond said bluntly. "Doctor says I have maybe a few months left. My liver is shot from all the drinking. I came to say I am sorry for what I did to you. It was the worst thing I ever did, and I have regretted it every day since." Teresa studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but she saw only genuine remorse and pain. "Why should I believe you?" "You do not have to," Raymond said. "I do not deserve your forgiveness. But I needed to try to make things right before I die. I sold you for $300 and drank it all away within a month. I have been living on the streets ever since, working odd jobs when I can, barely surviving. And every night I see your face, the way you looked at me that day. I destroyed my soul when I sold you." Teresa felt Ethan come up behind her, his presence solid and comforting. He put his hand on her shoulder and she reached up to cover it with her own. You are right that you do not deserve my forgiveness, Teresa said quietly. What you did was unforgivable. You sold me like an animal to pay for your drinking. You made me feel worthless and afraid, but I have learned something over the past 9 years. Holding on to hate and anger only hurts the person carrying it. So I am going to choose to forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. I forgive you, Uncle Raymond. I hope you find some peace before you die. Tears ran down Raymond's weathered face. Thank you, he whispered. That is more than I deserve. I can see you have made a good life for yourself. I am glad. You were always a good girl and you deserved better than what I gave you. Do you need anything? Ethan asked, speaking for the first time. Food, water? Raymond shook his head. No, I just needed to say my piece. I will be on my way now. He turned to leave, but Teresa stopped him. Wait, she said. She went into the house and came back with a bundle of food and a canteen of water. She also included some money. Take this. I do not want you to starve. Raymond took the bundle with shaking hands. You are a better person than I ever was. I am sorry, Teresa. I am so sorry. He turned and limped back down the road. Teresa watched him go, and Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind. Are you all right? He asked softly. I am, Teresa said, and she meant it. I pity him, but I do not hate him anymore. He is a broken man who destroyed his own life with his choices. I have everything he could never have because he did not know how to cherish what was important. They heard the sound of children laughing and turned to see Samuel, now 8 years old, chasing Rose, who was 5, around the yard. Thomas, age 2, was sitting on a blanket under a tree, playing with wooden blocks that Ethan had carved for him. This was Teresa's life now, full of love and laughter and purpose. Come on, Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. Let us go play with our children. They spent the afternoon as a family, playing games and telling stories. Later, after the children were in bed, Teresa and Ethan sat on the porch watching the stars come out. Teresa leaned against her husband, feeling completely at peace. You ever regret it? Teresa asked softly. Spending all that money on me that day. You could have used it for so many other things. Ethan turned her face toward his and kissed her gently. Buying your freedom was the best investment I ever made. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to work hard and build something meaningful. You gave me everything, Teresa. How could I ever regret that? I love you, Teresa said, her voice thick with emotion. I will love you for the rest of my life and beyond. And I love you, Ethan said, my brave, beautiful wife. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something wonderful. You inspire me every day. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. In 1887, a harsh winter killed some of their cattle, but they recovered. In 1889, a fire damaged the barn, but with the help of their neighbors, they rebuilt it bigger and better. Their children grew and thrived. Samuel showed a natural talent for working with horses and spent hours helping his father train the young stock. Rose loved to read and could often be found curled up with a book, lost in imaginary worlds. Thomas was the adventurous one, always exploring and getting into mischief. In 1891, Teresa gave birth to their 4th and final child, a daughter they named Grace Catherine. She completed their family, and Teresa felt that their life was now exactly as it was meant to be. The Rocking Inn was one of the most successful ranches in the area, and the Novak name was respected throughout Wyoming, which had achieved statehood in 1890. As the new century approached, the children began to grow up and find their own paths. Samuel, at 21, married a sweet girl from town named Martha and built a house on the western edge of the ranch property. He and Ethan ran the horse operation together, and Teresa was delighted to become a grandmother when Martha gave birth to a boy in 1899. Rose, at 19, shocked everyone by announcing that she wanted to go to college. It was unusual for a woman, but Ethan and Teresa supported her decision. She went to the University of Wyoming in Laramie to study literature, and she wrote home regularly with tales of her adventures in the wider world. Thomas, at 17, was still trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. He loved the ranch but also felt the pull of seeing more of the world. Grace, at 9, was still young, but she showed signs of inheriting both her mother's compassion and her father's business sense. In the fall of 1900, Ethan and Teresa celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. They were in their early 50s now, with gray threading through their hair and lines on their faces earned through years of hard work and laughter. They sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You remember that day in Wheatland?" Teresa asked, taking Ethan's hand. "When you bought my freedom." "I remember every detail," Ethan said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen, standing there with your head held high despite everything that had been done to you." "I was terrified," Teresa admitted. "I had no idea who you were or what you wanted from me. I thought my life was over." "Instead, it was just beginning," Ethan said. "For both of us. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Teresa. Before you came into my life, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me purpose and joy. You gave me a family and a reason to build something lasting." Teresa leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "We built it together. Everything we have, we created side by side." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The sounds of the ranch at evening surrounded them, familiar and comforting. From the bunkhouse, they could hear the ranch hands laughing and talking. From Samuel's house, they could hear the faint sound of their grandson crying and Martha singing a lullaby. "I have been thinking," Ethan said slowly. "Maybe it is time to start stepping back a bit, letting Samuel take over more of the day-to-day operations. We have worked hard for over 20 years. Maybe we deserve to slow down and enjoy what we have built." "Are you saying you want to retire?" Teresa asked, surprised. Ethan had always been such a driven man, always working on the next project or improvement. "Not retire exactly," Ethan said. "But maybe not work quite so hard. I want to spend more time with you, with our grandchildren. I want to travel a bit, see some of the country we have never had time to visit." "What do you think?" Teresa thought about it. The idea of having more time to pursue her own interests was appealing. She had always wanted to start a proper garden, maybe raise some chickens for herself rather than for selling, and traveling sounded wonderful. She had barely left Wyoming in all the years she had been there. "I think that sounds perfect," she said. "Let us talk to Samuel and see what he thinks." Samuel was enthusiastic about taking on more responsibility. He had been running the horse operation for years and knew the ranch as well as his father did. With Ethan's guidance, he began to take over more of the management duties. This freed up Ethan and Teresa to pursue other interests. They took trips to Denver and Santa Fe, marveling at the cities and the changes that were sweeping across the West. They visited Rose in Laramie and attended her graduation from the university. They spent long afternoons with their grandchildren, telling them stories and passing on the wisdom they had gained over the years. Teresa started a charitable organization in Wheatland to help women in difficult situations. She worked with the local church to provide shelter and assistance to women fleeing abuse or poverty. Many people in town remembered Teresa's own story, and her work inspired others to contribute time and money to the cause. In 1905, Thomas announced that he had decided to join the Army. It was a difficult decision for Ethan and Teresa, but they supported him. He promised to write regularly and to come home on leave whenever he could. Grace, now 14, was growing into a remarkable young woman. She had her mother's beauty and her father's intelligence, and she had already attracted the attention of several young men in the area, though she seemed more interested in her studies than in romance. The years rolled on, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, and the Novak name remained respected throughout the state. Ethan and Teresa grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They were partners in every sense of the word, facing life's challenges side by side and celebrating its joys together. In the spring of 1915, Ethan fell ill. It started as a simple cough but developed into pneumonia. Teresa nursed him devotedly, but as the weeks passed, it became clear that he was not going to recover. On a warm May evening, with Teresa holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed, Ethan Novak passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 68 years old. Teresa felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. For nearly 40 years, Ethan had been her partner, her love, her best friend. The world seemed dimmer without him in it. But she drew strength from her children and grandchildren, and from the knowledge that Ethan had lived a good life and had died knowing he was loved. She stood at his graveside in the cemetery in Wheatland, watching as they lowered his coffin into the ground. The headstone read, Ethan James Novak, 1847 to 1915. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, a man who stood for justice and lived with honor. Teresa placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, the same kind of flowers he used to pick for her when they were courting. Thank you, she whispered to him. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for giving me hope when I had none, for loving me when I felt unlovable. Wait for me, my love. I will see you again. Teresa lived for another 12 years, watching her family continue to grow and thrive. She remained active in her charitable work and became a beloved figure in Wheatland, known for her kindness and generosity. She told her story to anyone who would listen, wanting people to understand that circumstances do not define a person, that it is possible to overcome even the worst situations with courage and determination. On a cold December evening in 1927, Teresa Novak died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74. She was surrounded by 3 generations of her family, all of whom owed their existence to a cowboy who had chosen to do the right thing 46 years earlier. They buried her next to Ethan in the cemetery in Wheatland. Her headstone read, Teresa Lawson Novak, 1853 to 1927. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, she turned chains into wings and taught us all to fly. The Rocking Inn Ranch continued to operate for another 50 years, passing through several generations of Novaks before eventually being sold. But the story of Ethan and Teresa lived on, told and retold by their descendants. It became a family legend, a reminder that love and courage could overcome even the darkest circumstances, that one person choosing to do the right thing could change the course of many lives. In a small museum in Wheatland, there is a display about the history of the area. Among the artifacts is a faded photograph from 1900 showing an older couple standing in front of a ranch house. The man has his arm around the woman and both are smiling at the camera. The caption reads, Ethan and Teresa Novak, founders of the Rocking Inn Ranch. Their love story became one of the most enduring romances in Wyoming history. And indeed it was. It was a story of a woman who refused to be defined by her circumstances, and a man who saw her worth when the world had tried to convince her she had none. It was a story of freedom bought and freely given, of trust earned and love shared. It was a story of building something beautiful out of ashes, of creating a legacy that would outlast any individual life. But most of all, it was a story about how one moment of compassion, one decision to help someone in need, can ripple out across generations, creating waves of love and hope that never truly end. The chains that had bound Teresa that terrible day in 1876 had been broken by a cowboy with a kind heart and a strong sense of justice. And from that breaking came a family, a ranch, a community of people who understood the value of standing up for what was right. Ethan had offered Teresa his last name, and in doing so, he had given her back her identity, her dignity, and her future. And Teresa had taken that gift and multiplied it 1,000-fold, creating a life of love and purpose that touched countless others. Their story was proof that in the wild, harsh landscape of the American West, the most powerful force was not violence or greed, but love expressed through action, through sacrifice, through choosing to see the humanity in another person when the world said they were worthless. Long after both Ethan and Teresa were gone, their descendants continued to tell their story. It was told at family gatherings and recorded in journals. It was told to children who needed to understand where they came from and to young people who needed to believe that love was real and that one person could make a difference. The story of the cowboy who bought a woman's freedom and offered her his name became more than just history. It became a touchstone, a reminder of the kind of people the Novaks aspired to be. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Ethan and Teresa were together again, watching over the family they had created, satisfied that their love had built something that would endure long after they were gone. The legacy they left was not just land or money or success. It was a testament to the transforming power of love, to the courage it takes to choose hope over despair, to the difference one act of kindness can make in a world that often seems dark and cruel. Their story ended not with chains but with wings, not with despair but with hope, not with loneliness but with a love that echoed through the generations, proving that sometimes in the most unexpected moments, two souls can find each other and create something beautiful that will last forever. The cowboy bought her freedom, offered her his name, and together they built an empire of love that would never truly die.